Okay, so how the hell do we solve the climate crisis then, in your opinion? Like, what do we do?
Yeah. So ultimately, we have to reduce the amount of the stuff that's causing it, which is the CO2 in the atmosphere. So we talked about sucking it out, but what about putting it in, right? So you got to stop putting it in. We gotta stop burning fossil fuels, and if we want to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's step one. And it's not just CO2. There's methane from
the
cows. Yeah, from cows, rice paddies, landfills, fracking, things like that. There's nitrogen gases from fertilizers that are even more potent than CO2. There's a lot of greenhouse gases, but so we have to make sure we're emitting less of those greenhouse gases, and at the same time thinking about these solutions to draw it out. If we stopped emitting all greenhouse gases, it would eventually restabilize, right? It would take some time, but the oceans would absorb, the plants would absorb. It would take some time, but eventually we'd be okay. So. But we have to stop doing that if we want the climate to stabilize.
But do you think, as a whole, I know a lot of people out there still don't believe in climate change. Oh, no, firstly, when you encounter someone who doesn't believe in climate change, an educated person, like a politician, because my view is when I hear politicians who don't believe in climate change, like sometimes you can look at them and wait a minute, this dude been to the best school out there, graduated at the top of his class. He's solely spitting bullshit for his lobbyist, just saying that. I mean, but how do you feel when you encounter a climate denier?
Well, it depends where they're coming from, right? If it's if it depends how open-minded they are for talking about it. Politicians are one thing, but oftentimes there's the politician and the person, and they're different. It's kind of like the actor, who plays a part on a screen, and they do it really well, and they're successful. And then at home, they're just chilled out and laid back or whatever. Politicians are very similar. They have a role to play in their jobs, and then they might be different as people. So it depends. You have to figure out where people are coming from, and I think it's not a political issue. It shouldn't be politicized. Everyone cares about their home, about each other, about their families, about their communities. And so I think if you can reach common values and figure out how it relates back to what's happening around the world, you can draw some common dialogue. There's different values for different people. Sometimes we think of conservative audiences as being very interested in family and technology and jobs and terrorism and and those aspects. And those are all connected to the environment and climate. And so if you can speak to values that appeal to certain audiences and relate it back, then you can have a conversation.
Okay, so there's a statistic that everyone quotes that 97% of scientists believe climate change is real. Have you ever run into any of the 3% that don't?
Yeah, they're all idiots. I mean, that's a scientific jargon. Let me explain what that means to you. Yeah. And I'll just say that. So yeah, I mean, we've reassessed their papers and they totally screwed it up, and so it's actually now 100%. So it's not like a belief. It's there's no belief in science. There either is or there isn't, and so the science shows that climate's changing, and so one thing is that you also hear is that climate changes naturally, right?
Yeah, okay, because, look, not meaning to cut you off, because they were saying during, I guess, the Paleolithic era, there was more carbon in the air than there is now?
Yeah.
Okay, so explain, go on.
Yeah, and it was crazy hot, and you wouldn't want to live there, and you'd be stomped on by a dinosaur. So, so the climate has absolutely changed, naturally throughout the course of the birth of the Earth. The temperature goes up, temperature goes down, we get a little closer to the sun, we get a little further away, the solar cycles, and there's these natural bounds, and we've been tracking that. And we can track it for super long amounts of time. Now, what's happened is that in recent times, we've gone outside those natural bounds, outside those natural fluctuations, and that is the human fingerprint.
Okay. So I run into a friend or someone. What's the best way to explain to someone, in simple terms, that climate change is real? Because you got to realize most people aren't necessarily sitting down listening to science guys like yourself. We out there watching TV, and you can have a group of people who say, well, hey, it's a hoax created by the Chinese.
Yeah.
So how do you explain to people in very simple terms that climate is real?
Yeah. Well, first off, I point them to this video, and be like, check out the Sky John video. This will explain it all to you, and then you'll know what's up. But again, it really depends on who the person is, right? There's no universal silver bullet that like, oh, if I say this right thing, just like suddenly everyone will get it, right? You have to, you really have to empathize and understand where people are coming from. What are their values? What do they know? What is their experience? Where can you find those connections? And it takes more than just the perfect words or the right facts or the right science. It really takes an empathetic understanding of individuals and their differences and their values to connect to them. And so, it depends. And, you also have to find out where they're getting their information from, right? You get a lot of denier talking points. And, there's ways to counter that. There's people who are just interested in the facts and the science. And there's people who don't read that, right? They don't hear it. You could tell them, yeah, the temperature's gotten warmer since like last, year or 10 years or whatever. It's too jargony or too sciencey or too data. But if you tell them a story, it might be different. You'd be like, do you remember when you and your grandpa used to go, fishing, right? Back in the day, and there was all this fish, and the river was that high, and now it's not. Like, where are the fish? Where is the river? And then, like, suddenly, a way to communicate through just a story gets them to draw that link to, wait a second, what something is happening.